Okay, so remember our timeline on the board there. And so we're looking at, we've talked a lot about the Roman Republic and, Rome becoming then a greater power in the Mediterranean. And I think you're reading quotes, and now I'm blanking on his name, a Roman historian talking about how conquest is bad for Rome. And so I think we can kind of see how the struggles they have here, it ends the Republic, but then we see the birth of one of the great empires of history. So, um, you have read this material already, so you can look through these slides as a review and kind of maybe add to the notes that you've already taken or take separate note sheet, however you prefer. But there's going to be a lot of information on the slides that you might not necessarily need to write down everything, but just, you can pause and kind of take it all in. But then perhaps it might overlap with what you already have in your notes, so just add to it. Okay, so to begin kind of this, how we move from late Republic to, the end of the Republic to the Empire, we start to see some changes in the army, right? Kind of like the Greeks, right? Citizens would then fight in the military. So they kind of transition from that into, I think I cut off military there, into a professional army. And we start to see then, not only with the changes in the army, we start to see then just challenges to Roman stability. So we'll see sometimes the army becomes loyal to generals rather than the Republic. We'll see a series of slave revolts, political murders and intrigues, poverty, right? A wealth gap. Anytime you see that, usually leads to revolutions throughout history. And then we start to see corruption in the system, right? The elections are rigged in favor of the wealthy, and people are not feeling represented, etc. Okay, so then we have a series of reformers that are going to try to address these problems, and usually, as you can see, it doesn't go well for them. So we'll start with the Gracchus brothers, Tiberius and Gaius. Again, remember, I hope you're memorizing all the statuary here. We're going to have a quiz, remember, on both the Greeks and the Romans, and see if you can remember everybody according to their busts. Okay, so they try to reform and give back to the poor, especially land. Of course, the wealthiest people are threatened by this because their popularity with the plebeians. Tiberius will be murdered for this, and Gaius was either murdered or committed suicide. Either way, the reform movements don't really quite stick. So we have another general, Marius, and so he starts to professionalize the army. He even allowed landless men to serve. Remember, they thought you had to be a landowner, that you're fighting for something. But he expanded the army to include these men. And so he was reelected to consul many times, but he would use his army in political matters. So we'll see that as a pattern as well. And then Sulla, a general who would use his troops, against Rome, but he was sort of one of those tyrants that was supposed to kind of come in for a short time, and then he ended up staying for, I don't know, 20 years or so. And so he instituted this reign of terror, used whatever he had to control his enemies. So these are kind of the different things happening in Rome as we approach, Julius Caesar. So one kind of famous story here is Spartacus. He was a slave and a gladiator, and was a famous leader in a major slave uprising. And like most slave uprisings, they don't go well, and he was ultimately defeated. And so soon, though, Romans did not rely on slave labor as much as they did in the past, because this, would scare them. Okay, so in the midst of this chaos, we have the rise of three men who, through various, and we'll kind of talk about Julius Caesar here a little bit later. But all of these men are wealthy and they're powerful and have had, and your book or your readings kind of go through some of their great achievements, but they sort of come together and form the first triumvirate to try to bring some stability to Rome. So here's a little bit about Crassus and then Pompey. And so they're sort of interconnected as well, but they're all going to kind of vie each other for power eventually, especially after Crassus is killed. Okay, so there's going to be a civil war, right, over this power. And so Caesar's been out and about. Here's Gaul conquering territory. You may know it as France. And Pompey starts to get nervous, right? So we can see the expansion here of the Roman Empire. And so Pompey starts to get nervous that Caesar's getting too popular and too powerful. And this is a painting of Caesar crossing the Rubicon, which is a river outside Rome. And this now becomes an expression when you sort of cross the line and you can't go back. So maybe in your life you might have that moment when you cross the Rubicon, right? And this comes from this famous moment in history when Caesar is sort of goes against Pompey's commands, crosses this river, which shows he means to take control. And so they fight, and Caesar ultimately wins. So when now we get into some intrigue, some romance. When Caesar was pursuing Pompey into Egypt, he finds himself in a power struggle between Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy the 13th. So remember Ptolemy, I mean, this is part of the Hellenistic Empire, right? When Alexander's empire fragments, this is kind of the descendants of those rulers. And so he kind of joins sides with Cleopatra, and they have a son together. And even though Caesar is married, he brings her back to Rome, and she stays there and until Caesar's death. But of course, I'm biased, right? Men are always scared of a powerful woman. So a lot of rumors kind of circle about her and bringing down Caesar. This is a bust of Cleopatra, they think. This, of course, is the lovely Elizabeth Taylor. I don't know if this is too old school for you guys, but she played Cleopatra in a famous film. So sometimes when you think Cleopatra, I have to say, I think Elizabeth Taylor. Okay, so that is sort of kind of something they can hold against Julius Caesar. So Caesar has got a lot going for him, right? And so I'll just take a minute here and see all of his achievements, and especially take a look at these reforms, and you can see why there was fear that he might end the Republic. And I don't know if this is true or if maybe he would or whatever, but certainly some of these reforms, right, made wealthy people angry. So on the 15th of March, the Ides of March, he was stabbed to death by several senators, including some of his allies. One of them is Brutus, made famous in Shakespeare's play, Julius Caesar, by when he looks up and sees his friend stabbing him, he says, "You too, Brutus?" Et tu, Brute? Now it becomes famous. So when your friend betrays you, feel free to use that phrase. Remember, two important phrases here. Crossing the Rubicon means you've declared your intentions and you can't go back. And et tu, Brute, when your friend betrays you. And hopefully you don't have to use that very often. So people rioted in response. So there was all these allegations, but he never became an emperor. So chaos comes out. So then a second triumvirate is formed by some three other powerful men, right? Mark Antony, Caesar's friend and close ally, Octavian, his grandnephew, and another powerful supporter of Julius Caesar's. So, side note, Lepidus will always be easy to recognize. No, he's got a beard. I don't think we see that in a lot of these statues, so keep that in mind for your quiz. Okay, so anyway, he rules North Africa, but just like the first triumvirate, you start to see some kind of political maneuvering, and it's done here by this man, Octavian, as he starts to kind of push out the others. So he's ruling North Africa, right? But of course will be banished by Octavian. He'll rule the East, but he will start to struggle with Octavian for power, and this will set off yet another civil war. So Cleopatra, she's back, this time with Mark Antony. And again, maybe we'll just have to watch this movie because it's a classic. But this is Richard Burton. Her real, this is Elizabeth Taylor, real life married couple, kind of like the Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie of their time, but more tempestuous relationship. And anyway, they're in this movie together. So you have to think about them, right? Again, this is all before even I was born. Okay, so Anthony then decides he wants support against Octavian, and they meet, and I guess she's a powerful woman, and he falls in love with her, and they have children together. And so then this is what Octavian will use to kind of sway public opinion against Antony, because again, heaven forbid a powerful woman gets in to play here, plus she's a foreigner, right? So she's from Egypt, and so that's a way for them to say, oh, she's corrupting him, etc. So Octavian claims that Antony is going to plan to rule Rome, but from Egypt and perhaps with Cleopatra. So fighting ensues. There you go. They fight a battle, and Octavian wins, and this will lead, of course, to Mark Antony and Cleopatra's suicides, as happens in Roman history. They cannot live with the defeat of their plans. And so Octavian then becomes the ruler here, and the people call him Augustus, right? Or Exalted One. And so even though, remember, he's going to be careful about this use of the word emperor, but we know from our readings he all but becomes that. While they always remain, the Roman Republic will always remain, but emperors will rule from here on out. So we kind of end the phase of the Republic and enter into the Empire. So he keeps in some, he restores stability and restores some of the aspects of the Republic. He will also implement the bread and circuses, right? How do you keep people appeased? Rather than maybe reforming society, but if you entertain them with good times and free food, maybe they won't think about the problems in their society. So here you go. Since I've just been referencing movies, I'll reference one from your generation, The Hunger Games, right? In Latin, this is similar to, Hunger Games reference. Bread, I think plural is panem. And if you remember, the capital city is Panem. How do you distract people from their terrible lives? You entertain them with the Hunger Games, right? See, 21st century. There you go. Okay, so of course, public works, aqueducts, all of these technical achievements here. And they experienced this time known, here's the symbol, the Pax Romana, which is the Roman peace. Augustus then, with some of these reforms and putting the republic back and establishing the empire into one of stability and wealth, will see 200 years of peace, Pax Romana, and that is then the golden age of Rome. Okay, so ultimately then, here's a good review of why the republic fails, and frankly, this is a great list of why any government or empire will fall for a lot of these reasons. So we saw this kind of cycle, we saw people trying to reform it, and the power plays, and then ultimately ending with Octavian taking over and establishing the empire. So I went through that pretty quickly because I only got 15 minutes, but hope you enjoyed.